Hello, this is Lebster. This is a root strategy guide focusing on the moles. This strategy aims to start the game by playing the Smol mole strategy and then pivoting into a market build heavy endgame to close it out with the Lord, Banker, and crafting points. Now, before I get into the guide, the duchy has many possible playstyles that can be employed. And of course, there will be situations where this strategy does not fit the situation. But this strategy is seemingly consistent and not too rare to get rolling. So, I feel a guide and general rundown of the principles that go into it potentially helpful, and I hope it is. Okay, before I get into the guide, I'm going to go through a rundown of what I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to go over the principles. I'm going to outline the general heuristics and guidelines that you should keep in mind. And then I'm going to go through the setup and then the turn-by-turn breakdown. That'll just feature things to keep in mind and goals for the first few turns. Then I will get into what you should do after your first build turn, and then we'll have the conclusion. Alright. Firstly, in your opening turns, the most important thing you want to keep in mind is your opening sway order. You want to go Brigadier, Mayor, and then Baron of Dirt. Brigadier helps set you up to spread. Mayor only empowers her to do that even more. And then Baron of Dirt helps you profit from your markets even more later on. These ministers are going to be crucial to our game plan. Unless specific circumstances call for something else, your 2 assembly actions should only be double recruit. Exceptions to this would be building more on your build turns or spreading out warriors to sway before you get Brigadier. Preserve warriors early on by spreading out far and thin. As soon as possible, spread out to as many clearings as you can with Brig. This makes it difficult for your enemies to remove you from every single spot, and you get more options when swaying. Additionally, keep the burrow full. Generally, before you pivot into building, it is recommended to keep only 1 to 2 moles in a clearing. A third mole can be added to clearings for martial law or the tunnel if desired, but it should be done sparingly to keep warriors for the late game if enemies do go after you. Aim to keep 5 to 10 warriors in your burrow for your first build clearing. Building for the first time will very likely put a target on your back. Pre-pivot, prioritize non-bird cards. Before you build markets, it is essential to preserve your cards. Spending bird cards trying to reveal them will bleed you of your sway potential if it happens too often. As well, hold on to crafting options for when you do pivot. Focus on crafts that are of similar suit so you can maximize your potential. Also, dominant swapping can be useful to preserve suited cards. The previous stuff was early game things to consider, and now this is mid-game, what you should think about when pivoting. Firstly, only build in the mid to late game. The building pivot should only come when you have adequate crafting you can do immediately after building. Additionally, you need to have your buildings well defended. Quick returns are essential due to the danger of building. Pivot turn 4 to 6. This is due to, at this point, you have enough ministers and cards to change playstyles. Now, when it comes to deciding what to build, markets are generally more useful than citadels. Cards will be your main method of scoring in the late game, crafting and banker, and a wealth of card draw will help you line up points to win. The warriors from citadels should not be needed if preserving warriors have worked. In addition, the benefit of markets are felt immediately, card draw, while citadels require a whole round to pass for you to reap the benefit. But if you think you can hold the position and you need more warriors, then a citadel can be beneficial. It's up to your discretion. When you do start to get your buildings out, do not be afraid to burst. Building will make you the target of the table immediately, so capitalize on your benefits from the markets as soon as possible. If you fear an immediate attack on your buildings, consider leaving them open if you have already gotten all the crafting you can out of them. Due to price of failure only triggering once per instance of removal, minimizing your losses warrior-wise and setting up your buildings to be destroyed optimally can allow for another build and burst. This is especially useful if you have swayed buffer lords, or you have disposable ministers that you are willing to get rid of. But watch out for factions that can deal individual hits and destroy your buildings in multiple instances, such as the Lizard Cult or the Lord of the Hundreds with their looting. Finally, just keep in mind the concept of buffer lords in the late game. These are lords that you don't mind losing, and if you end up using the Baron or the Earl, it would be convenient, but they should be thought as protection to your core ministers. I was going to make this a long section, but really you just need the cards to be able to sway turn 1. Preferably make them suited so you don't lose them. And just put yourself in a clearing with 2 building slots, and preferably out of the reach from enemies. That's all I can really tell you. Everything else is situational. There is some space to think about what clearings to place with how much adjacency. Do you want a clearing with 5 adjacent clearings? Or 3 adjacent clearings? How spread out do you want to be? How condensed do you want your warriors to be? Personally, I don't know which one's better, so it's up to you. But also for your starting hand, you want to keep craftables that you can use for later. And I think that's all for setup. Alright, your first few turns are very simple usually. You want to recruit twice, if able to sway without moving. If that's not possible, you want to move until that is. Then you sway Brigadier. Turn 2, if possible, recruit twice, and then spread out with Brigadier regardless of whether you immediately need it. It's going to be useful later to have the warriors spread out far. And then sway Mayor. Turn 3, if possible, recruit twice, spread even more, then sway the Baron of Dirt. Or Formal if Baron cannot be swayed, but if you do go Formal, you want to get Baron later, very soon. Turn 4, this is where your options really open up. You want to start by recruiting, and then there's usually 4 candidates for sway. You could get one of the 2 lords. Both of these are more of a safe buffer pick, but they have additional potential benefits if you do wish to go for them. With Duchess, you can threaten even more passive point gain if you end up digging, but usually spending the cards does not end up being worth it and is better spent on building, swaying, or banker. Baron supports the use of citadels if you wish to employ them. Next up, banker. You can sway banker now, but turn 4 could be considered too early to sway banker due to the opportunity cost. Banker is usually a minister who assists in wrapping up the endgame, and typically it's good to sway banker when you know you're about to make a big burst, or when you secure a good card count for at least the next turn. Formal sets up for coming heavy build turns. This can greatly aid you in your pivot and allow for an even more optimal burst if taken. But it does hurt to sway such a low point value minister, but it could be nice getting it out of the way. Additionally, at turn 4, an early pivot could be done here, but it can be dangerous and leave you too vulnerable. Personally, I need more experience with this. Could be too early to even be realistic. Turn 5 is the turn where the pivot is usually begun to be considered. When exactly is the most optimal time to pivot heavily depends on your cards, what can be crafted, and the open clearings, and also the state of your enemies. But when you do pivot, you want to fully commit. Aspects of a good pivot include finding a defensible clearing, not a central one, that has 2 to 3 building slots, and has a suit that you can immediately craft with. Having a card to potentially dig to that location if needed. Bird cards are preferred for this due to being discarded anyway if revealed. Having the cards to fill the clearing with markets enough for desired crafts. Formal makes this easier, but a fortunate card draw can assist in this if you must build in the assembly step. Knowing if you must defend it heavily or not. If you fear an attack or want to ward one off, move in 5 to 12 warriors. If you do not think you will be attacked, 1 to 4 could work, but be careful. If you plan for these buildings to be destroyed, you can leave 1 to 0. This is best done if you have a few crafts for that clearing and you plan to pop up elsewhere later on, but make sure you are fine with losing 1 to 2 ministers. That kind of move is best saved for when you're fully done with it, and not like a turn 5 thing. If you can manage to sway after your pivot turn, that would be beneficial. But due to the high card investment of hunkering down, you may only be able to sway Squire. This could be a good time to sway Formal if he's not been swayed already, in order to prepare for another pop-up. but Marshall is also good. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that if your pivot turn is around 5 or 6, do not lose the buildings while your minister pool is still small. It will cripple your game and you will struggle to catch up. So make sure to properly defend them until you can afford not to care about them. It is very likely that your initial set of buildings gets destroyed, so it is vital to know what to do going forward. If you plan accordingly with your buildings getting destructed, you should have Brig, Mayor, and Duchess. But, depending on what stage of the game you're at, those ministers may be more or less valuable, and you might want to trade Brig for Banker if you want to go for the final stretch. And of course, Banker is going to be how you close out the game from 20 to 30 points. Each turn, if you have a good hand, you could get 5 points, or even more, depending on other circumstances, from Banker. Bird cards in this phase are very valuable to you too, since they make Banker a lot easier. Also, Formal will be very useful in helping you build buildings and get fast crafts, and just short-term buildings. And as always, you have, before you lose all your ministers, you have an amazing action economy, so you can use your battles from Brig to get to 30 as well, if you have the warriors for it. And due to being able to dig anywhere, you can kill a lot. Duchess is also very useful in closing out the game if you can manage to keep markets, and sometimes swaying may be more trouble than it's worth. You might, rather than spending 2 cards or 3 for only 2 or 1 points, you might want to spend a batch of them with the Banker. And just in the late game, just feel free to be greedy unless someone else is about to win, and just go for it. But that's all I can talk about for the endgame. It's all very circumstantial, and it's hard to offer specific advice for that part of the game. So eventually it comes down just to experience, knowing what to do. Alright, I hope this could have been helpful, or at least interesting. This strategy is my approach to the moles that I've gathered through personal experience in watching the Winter Tournament. If it's bad, just ignore this video, close it. You can comment if I got something wrong. I'd love to hear it. I'm always looking to improve. This is just my approach. It could be imperfect. And I don't even play moles this way all the time. But yeah, feedback and thoughts are welcome. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.